Hello again. I'm Dean Jones, President and CEO of RealLogic Sotheby's International Realty, and this is another installation of Market Perspectives with Kevin Wallace of Wallace Properties. We are so happy to have you aboard.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Yeah.
I'm so impressed with you. You know, first of all, we have a few things in common. First of which, I worked with my father for about 10 or 15 years. How long have you and Bob been working together?
Well, I've been with Wallace Properties for 18 years now, and I was his lawyer before that, so about 20 years.
So you got to send him some pretty big bills, I guess, huh?
Back in the day, yeah, the bills got bigger and bigger to the point where it made sense for me to come over and work at the company instead of for the company. So that was back in, like I say, 18 years ago, and we've had a great run together building the company up to what it is today.
Well, and you guys are really multi-dimensional in a sense. So kind of four legs of the table. You're a builder, right? Mm-hmm. Developer. You're a manager of a portfolio. You also run an investment group.
Correct.
And then also any other elements that you run at Wallace Properties?
Yeah, I kind of look at it as we have the service side of the business, which is focused on property management and asset management, and that we do for our own portfolio of investments and development as well as for others. We have probably about a third of our revenue comes into the service side of the business from our own portfolio, and then 2/3 from clients we have that have properties that we don't have an interest in.
Right.
And then we do a combination of investments where we go out and acquire something that exists today. When we buy it, apartments, retail, small office buildings. And then we have a development division that focuses on mixed-use centers, apartments over retail in transitory areas in Seattle and Bellevue.
And you have a finance background as well.
Right. So I went through my undergrad at Seattle U grad and did finance there, and then went on to law school at Gonzaga.
Yes.
This was in the era when they first started the basketball program that we know today, but really exciting place to be an alum of. We'd go watch the basketball games. And so went out from there and then practiced law for 7 years at a couple of big law firms in Seattle, what was formerly called Preston Gates and Ellis.
Yes, of course.
Microsoft's the Gates in that was Bill Gates Sr., who I worked down the hall from. Was a lot of fun to get to know.
Fascinating.
And then Foster Pepper was a more real estate focused firm. So after a few years, I moved over there and practiced there for a time. And as I kind of grew in experience, and was representing Wallace Properties as the attorney, it, like I say, became more and more evident that it was a smart move for me to move over to the company and go back and work with my former bosses, now them being my lawyers.
Right. No, it's fabulous. You're so well-rounded as, having a front seat, for this performance of I mean, really, the last 40 years that Wallace Properties has been around has been pretty meteoric, right? I mean, I don't think there could be a more fast-growing metro area in the United States. And I kind of view Seattle and Bellevue as like two pistons in the same engine, or do you think they fight each other and compete?
Definitely the former. I mean, we certainly want it to be that way. I think of, if you compare Seattle and Bellevue to a shopping center, Seattle's like the anchor tenant, the grocery store. Mm-hmm. If the grocery store is not doing well, then the drugstore nearby is not doing well either.
Right.
So it's always been, it's very important to people from Bellevue and the Bellevue economy that Seattle's economy is successful too, and that we're working together, right? And that's what's so exciting about the new council we have in Seattle and the new mayor. After a long time of really not being able to have conversations between the business community and the government in Seattle, we now have that opportunity. So really exciting to see what this year portends for the government in Seattle and our ability to work with them.
I mean, I'm feeling a lot more optimistic. We got a new city council in Seattle, and I know our mayor is working hard at trying to make some intervention and enforcement upgrades, with the police department, with some of the social challenges downtown. But it wasn't a very fun place to be through the pandemic.
Right.
I'm sure you've been paying attention. Many assets in downtown Seattle, or mostly east side for you?
So we are a mix between Seattle and Bellevue, a little bit more dollar value-wise in Seattle, but it's in the north end. So we have assets in Northgate, Capitol Hill, so north of I-90, right, but not in downtown.
Right. So here's a question. I mean, was HQ2 for Amazon really, in your mind, another way of saying 425, let's push us all over to the east side?
Well, that's, we didn't mention in the intro that I served for 8 years on the Bellevue City Council, and that's one of my real points of pride back in 2016 when I was on the council still. Amazon came out with the HQ2 and was really expressing its frustration with the city of Seattle and the current council, who is basically driving them out of town. And so when they announced that, said to the rest of the council members and our economic development director at the city, I said, we need to respond to that. And even if we think we have no chance in being HQ2, which we didn't, we need to tell Amazon that we love them, we want them, and we're here to create the infrastructure and their ability to grow in Seattle over here on the east side. And we did, and other cities were sending them cactuses and all sorts of other tricks to get them to be the HQ2 in their city. And Bellevue was able to become sort of HQ 2.5 without any incentives, any gifts, anything, just being a welcoming city close to the city that wasn't at the time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was definitely some loss for Seattle and a huge gain for the city of Bellevue. What's the latest stats that you're aware of? I know you're no longer on the city council, but I'm sure you're aware of the occupancy loads of tech on the east side. Just share with our audience a little bit about how impactful it is to the city of Bellevue.
So interesting story there. I mean, if it were not for Amazon, the story of Bellevue would be that it lost Expedia, Boeing, and Microsoft in 5 years. As it is, Amazon has come in, and also Meta is certainly worth mentioning. Meta, with the jobs that they've created in Bellevue, any other era would get them a ticker tape parade and it would be front page news every week. But because Amazon has so overwhelmed them, by double the job count, all we really look at is Amazon. But what those companies have done is basically offset the losses that we've seen from Microsoft and Boeing, and it was sort of gotten us to a point where we're breaking even in Bellevue right now. And in some respects, it's actually been good for the city because Bellevue was bursting at the seams back in 2019, and had Amazon grown in, provided the 25,000 jobs it said it was going to provide at the pace it was going to provide them, it would have been a traffic nightmare. So this actually kind of worked out to the benefit of the city of Bellevue because it's had time to adjust more slowly to the growth.
Well, speaking of adjusting slowly, we've got work from home dynamics and a lot of empty escalators and elevators in downtown Bellevue, downtown Seattle. I mean, where do you think the pandemic is going to leave us ultimately with office demand and returning to the office and the future of these office buildings?
Great question. I compare it to, so when I originally started in real estate, I was in retail. And so I look at back in that time, we went through the online sales era, right? Amazon started out. And what happened in that era was online sales sucked out the demand for the traditional grocery anchored shopping center. And what you saw in that era, and it's still kind of remnants of it are still happening today, but you saw that the best retail, Bellevue Square, never missed a beat, kept on growing. The middle stuff had to reposition and change its tenants from sellers of goods to sellers of services. And the stuff that wasn't that great, the C-class stuff, is not great today, right? Compare that then to what's happening with the office market, exactly the same phenomenon. You have the work from home and the tech bust has caused this reduction in the demand for office buildings. The best of the best, is like downtown Bellevue and Spring District. Those areas are going to reabsorb very quickly, especially the best of the best buildings in those areas. The medium space, the older generation space like that Microsoft left, is going to take a little longer, and it's going to pull in tenants from other areas that couldn't afford to be there before, but now they can. And they'll have an opportunity to move into a downtown area that has more amenities for their employees. What's going to suffer is that C-class stuff, right? The I-90 corridor, if you look at those old office parks out there really isn't a useful life for those anymore.
It's a dinosaur.
Right. And so that's where, the cities really need to take a look at that older stock and that land and think about quickly what can they do to enable the owners of those properties to have more flexibility in redeveloping their land, change the zoning code so that they can be converted from office to apartments and address the housing crisis that we have. So great opportunities there if the cities are able to act on them.
Well, and I've seen that. So we're speaking about upzoning effectively, and you may know I'm from Vancouver, BC, and
Mm.
we got a preview perhaps of what might be our future here as a bit of a harbinger, whether it was tower spacing, that was borrowed by Mayor Nichols back in 2006, or the role of light rail with our SkyTrain up in Vancouver, which was really built around the the World Fair in 1986.
Mm-hmm.
But everywhere that the light rail landed as a station became a future upzone and very dynamic mixed use multifamily environment. So they effectively upzoned all the stations. And I just wonder if that's not going to be a preview of where we end up going, because we have a lot of development need, and we now have the Sound Transit 3, which is a ton of track and a lot of stations. And you've done a development on a transit-based development in Northgate, right?
Yeah, I mean, most of what we've done, if not all, is been within half a mile of a future light rail station.
Okay.
At the time, there weren't there, but as compared, the Vancouver area is really I think a great model to look at, and kind of how they approach SkyTrain is not really how we've approached the zoning around the light rail stations here. We've been much more muted in our increases in density. So if you go, Burnaby is a good comparison, I think, to Bellevue as far as the suburban city near the big city. And if you look at Burnaby right now, you can drive up the SkyTrain line, and there's these spectacular multi-story condo buildings all along it, right? With great housing options for people. And that's just not, what we've done outside of a few areas, downtown Bellevue, downtown Seattle. There's zoning in Seattle near like the Northgate station, for example, where, you're talking about 45-story buildings, and, nobody knows what FAR means, but 2 FAR, which is a very limited scale of development. The floor area ratios for a place near a light rail station ought to be at least 6 FAR, where you can build high-rise buildings and structures that can attract a lot of people, and we're way underzoned.
But why do we not have that will? I mean, you're on city council. I mean, why wouldn't we go to the community and say, one of the assets that we have as a city is airspace, and we have the infrastructure with light rail now. We should put higher density housing in there and mixed use developments and generate some tax base and, line the coffers of the city with the permits. And why isn't that just not a collectively good idea to go vertical?
Yeah, I think you're asking a developer, so to me
I know
it's
your
like
answer.
the cities ought to open the doors and let the developers figure out how to use their creativity and their finances to come up with the best solution possible, and meet the market. And that really the cities kind of take a backwards approach to that, and a lot of it is due, of course, to politics. They want to be very restrictive in what can be provided and try to create strict rules, and it can be so limiting that you end up often getting nothing. And so why do we have such a huge undersupply of housing around here? Part of it is that. Part of it is the Growth Management Act, which has for a generation constrained the supply of land, right? To where, as there's just simply not enough land to serve the single family market at all, right? And we're not opening up enough land to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So, these are the challenges we have. And then it's just simple microeconomics, right? If you reduce the supply and the demand continues to increase, then what's the price going to do?
Yeah, it's going to go up. I mean, obviously we think we're at that inflection point now. We specialize a little more in housing, as you know, and we're seeing, loan originations are way up. There's a lot of pent up demand because a lot of people sat on their hands for the last couple of years waiting to see what was happening geopolitically or with, mortgage interest rates. Obviously the Fed wasn't done abusing us with their rate hikes.
Exactly.
But it now seems like all of those headwinds are calming down or maybe even becoming tailwinds. So, I wonder where you feel like we're at in this cycle. We got a big presidential election coming up. That's going to be a popcorn moment, isn't it? It's going to be pretty interesting for the next
be an interesting
8
year
months.
for sure.
Yeah. And just kind of where do you feel like the macroeconomic conditions are in the Puget Sound area? Are you bullish or are you pausing?
Well, I mean, over the course of a decade, I'm extremely bullish on Seattle and Bellevue, particularly Bellevue. You look at telling the story of how to justify building an apartment building in an area. Downtown Bellevue is the easiest place to tell that story. Amazon, one of the largest companies in the world, and just a great corporate partner for the city. is building 6 million square feet of office space and slowly occupying it over, between now and the end of the decade.
Only 3 days a week occupying it,
Yeah.
my friend.
But even so, right? And I mean, a number of bodies that they're bringing in, and there's a much higher propensity for these tech companies to employ people who rent apartments than other industries, other sectors. So it's a great story for apartments, but none of, I'm not moving forward, nor are any of my competitors with their projects that are teed up to move forward in Bellevue because of the financing issues.
Right.
And so the issue you have is the interest rates doubled, the construction costs haven't fallen, and rents have actually dropped.
That's right.
Operating expenses have also gone up quite a bit.
Yeah.
So the fundamentals are just completely out of shape right now, and it's going to take time to have those things come back into alignment. They certainly will, but what I think is going to happen is we're at the end of the supply wave now. Through the end of this year, all the apartments that started construction before the Fed started raising interest rates are going to be completed and leasing up. Right. In 2025, there's almost no supply that's going to be delivered.
I agree with you 100%. I think the demand is going to rise at the perfect time of no supply. And so by 2025, we'll be, post-election, post-pandemic, post-rate hike, and hopefully post-war with all the geopolitical elements going on. And, it's just an alternative theory would be to double down on development right now, because if you believe all those statements, then we're going to have peak demand. But the problem is it's currently not penciling for underwriting because it's a little difficult to get a project financed.
Right. I mean, it gets a little wonky, but if you think about the interest rates got so low and now they've risen 2%. Well, the actual number in your construction budget for the construction interest is not that great of an increase. But what makes it impossible is you have to look at, well, how do I refinance that construction loan into a permanent loan 2 years from now? And if you have to assume now that loan is 6% interest for a 10-year loan instead of 4% interest, everything gets thrown out of alignment, right? And so how that comes back into alignment and when is a huge question. When it does, the minute it does, there's going to be a lot of developers who have pent-up projects that are ready to pull the trigger as soon as they can.
Yeah, no, I mean, I was talking with a few architects that, it took a while to get a call back years ago because everyone was so busy.
Right.
And now they're calling saying, hey, you got any projects?
Yeah, I am a very popular lunch date right now.
I bet you are. Well, thanks for making time for a podcast. Let's talk about rent versus own.
Sure.
Why aren't you building condos?
So, my father has never been a particular fan of building condos because he says you have to pick the one moment in time where it makes sense to sell, before. And so from one level, apartments are a good investment for us as long-term owners with our strategy because you can adjust to market. You might get caught delivering at a poor time, but you rent up and you over a 10-year period recover and have a nice investment. Right. So condos kind of have that challenge for us. A lot of developers, though, do. And, there's some developers from Canada who are accustomed to building condos, would really love to build them down here. And they say, Kevin, we just can't do it because the tax structure down here is completely backwards from Vancouver, where it makes a lot of sense. And then you have these rules that, for example, you can't collect enough earnest money when you're developing a project. Up in Canada, you can pre-sell your units, your condos, right, and get real money at the table to be certain about your sales, which is not allowed here. And then, of course, the big kahuna is the construction liability, where the legislature allowed trial lawyers to come in and basically be, in a predatory way, come in and sue developers of condominiums after the projects were sold and under the guise of construction defects, which, as you know, is really not, in many cases, real defects, but it imposed so much liability into the system that insurers would no longer insure the projects. And that still remains true today. The trial lawyers basically sued themselves out of a job because they were so successful and the law allowed them to be.
Yeah, I mean, it's a consumer protection act that works so well, it scares developers from playing their public service job of building for sale. And it's more important than ever now because the condominium product lines are likely the only attainable bastion of affordability left, right? Because, townhomes are still very expensive to build. Obviously single-family homes, you know the story there.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, unless we're going to drive our way to affordability, if we want to stay in the in-city market in a high-density capacity, I mean, and you want to own it, show me another product line other than a condominium.
That's exactly right. I'm trying to help my son who's 22 get into a house, right? And a condo would be such a great opportunity for him. You look at $600,000 is such a huge amount of money for a 22-year-old, right? And that's really what a condo has the promise or the opportunity to provide, that entry point into the housing market for people. But it's completely shut off here. Right.
Well, we need to change the Condominium Act of Washington. Again, I think the challenges are more developers would lean in if they were able to charge more of earnest money
Mm-hmm.
instead of the 5%, non-refundable deposit structure, which has to remain in escrow and it can't be added to the capital stack. So basically, the developer has to come up with 100% of the capital, and with only 5% down and the ability to walk upon inspection prior to closing, the buyer, how much of a buyer are you? And so you're kind of nervous. And if the market corrects 7% and you only got 5%, in a non-refundable capacity, then you're either looking at a retrade or potentially a lost sale.
Right.
So, and that's really where we've been. That's been the story. About 93 to 95% of all the multifamily housing that's being developed is for rent. And we are now a city of renters. There's more renters
Right.
in the city of Seattle than there are, owners. And that's a challenge because, a lot of those consumers right now that are renting are well-heeled millennial tech workers, just to take one sort of demographic. And they, they're going to have to reach to buy. And affordability is becoming a challenge. And so I don't know what the answer is about that, Kevin, other than we'd have to change the Condo Act.
Well, that's exactly where things should start. And 5 years ago, the realtors and others got together and tried to push through a bill, and it got so watered down by the time it was adopted that at the time I said this is not going to solve the problem, and the legislators who don't know any better are going to think they did. And sure enough, here we are 5 years later. You still can't get insurance for a project. And what's happening is the only projects that get built for condominiums are super luxury projects, right? Mm-hmm. Avenue Bellevue can absorb that cost, but a wood frame project in Kenmore can't, right? And so you're seeing, like, if you want to look at it as a tool for producing housing that's more affordable to people, starts them in on that first rung of the housing ladder. The condo structure right now is just not enabling that to happen, and fixing the condo liability law in a way that other states have done would solve the problem.
Yeah, well, we got to push that one through. What about House Bill 1110? What's your view on adding those multifamily units to your backyard?
Yeah, it's funny. I just left lunch with a friend of mine who does smaller townhome developments and things like that, and we were talking about 1110. And it's a good step in the right direction. I think people who live in existing neighborhoods shouldn't really panic about their next door neighbor's house being purchased and turned into a sixplex, because there's a lot more that goes into developing a property than just changing the zoning, which is also an issue for, that's not going to be a magic bullet for increasing supply, because you have to still provide those units with water and sewer and power, and all of these things have not really been thought through at all in the wake of 1110. So we'll have to see how this bill continues to play out, and where it's going to make sense for new development to occur under that change in the law. But I do think it's positive momentum from the legislature. They've done another number of other bills too that are, I think, helping try to unlock the ability to supply more units.
Yeah, well, I think it's clear focus that the state has and all municipalities have right now on trying to answer the affordable housing question. And, we're not building nearly as many homes as we should be for all the reasons you mentioned: inflation, taxation, just the capital stack. It's not made any easier with like the liabilities associated with being a developer. But the reality is consumers are left with, eventually higher rents and higher median home prices. And, even though rates are going to come down here over the next year or so, it's still not making it that much easier for home ownership. So it's still the largest question that we have to answer. I think politically, that's where the responsibility lies in finding those solutions. Unless we do spot rezoning. I mean, I really liked your idea about the Class C properties that are effectively lost their utility. If they're going to be moving into, those tenants will be moving into Class A office because it's available, then rezoning entire areas would make sense to me, especially if they're around light rail. You mentioned the I-90 corridor, or around like Factoria, for instance. That's not a property that you manage, right? Anything around there?
No.
I mean, why wouldn't that just be the next Totem Lake Villages?
Yeah, and Factoria actually did have a redevelopment plan that they have not been able to pull off yet. This is like 10 years old now, where they had been looking at redeveloping some of their property. They're now looking at trying to demall the mall, which is a positive, I think, for the shopping center. Should be able to help it revitalize. But if you look at that area, again, there's excuse me, there's some really great redevelopment opportunities there, large tracts of land, and I think they could really help achieve the policy goals of the city of Bellevue and the region in being able to deliver more housing if they could just unlock the code.
What do you think is going to happen when they light up these light rail train cars? And I mean, I understand East Side's going to start, they're testing them now. So a year from now, we'll have passengers. I mean, how's that going to change?
Yeah, to me, I think that's another fortunate issue for the East Side. The way the light rail played out, they were not able to connect across the bridge right away. They ran into some huge construction projects on I-90 bridge. And so what we were able to do, and a large thanks to King County Councilmember Balducci, who's been a real advocate and leader of developing out the East Link light rail system, is, excuse me, you guys can edit that out, right? Sorry. So what's been really helpful with in the implementation of the light rail system is, with I-90 not being able to connect over to Seattle, it enables a starter line to happen between the South Bellevue Park and Ride near I-90, running through Bellevue, out through Bellred, and into Redmond past Microsoft. And so the utility of that line is not nearly as great as if it did connect to Seattle. But what it allows us to do over the east side is sort of establish how that light rail line will operate on the east side, and sort of try to set our own code of conduct and culture for how those are operating. Right now, all you hear in the news media is about how Sound Transit is unsafe, and people are smoking fentanyl on the trains, and all these issues, right? And what we need for Bellevue is and the entire east side in general, is for that train, for people to think it's safe and convenient to ride, right? We really need people to use it. And people on the east side just simply aren't going to ride that train unless they think that it's safe.
I mean, it's an interesting pilot, the way it worked out dynamically, that it's really East Siders riding the East Side train. And, I know Kemper Freeman was opposed to the light rail and was just very concerned about, the over connectivity. He's built an empire around free parking, let's be honest.
Right.
And also, keeping tent poles out of Bellevue, and, some of the challenges that Seattle has had and politically was willing to tolerate. And I would agree with you completely. I don't think many East Siders are willing to tolerate that, and they're wondering if that's going to change when a swipe of a card can get you on the train, and in 10 minutes you're connecting downtown Seattle to downtown Bellevue. Is that going to change? Is that going to change housing? Is it going to change retail? Is it going to change commercial office buildings? I'm just wondering what you think 5 years from now.
Yeah, I mean, it will definitely be a change, and I think largely beneficial change when the light rail line is fully open for business, and we can start connecting people from apartment, higher density neighborhoods in like Capitol Hill, ride the train over to your job at Amazon, ride the train back to your home where younger people like to live, right? People in their 20s want to live over here in the U District and Capitol Hill. So the light rail train provides a convenient option for them to do that. And it's kind of interesting, it actually has flipped from when the train was originally designed. That East Link was about taking people from Bellevue over to Seattle. Now it's just backwards. Take people from Capitol Hill over to downtown Bellevue. So great opportunity there. I also think, important thing to mention is Bellevue has been very out in front on this issue of safety, and the council in the last budget cycle a couple of years ago approved a special fund to allow the police chief to develop a program in cooperation with Sound Transit's security and the other police chiefs on the east side to focus on transit safety at the stations and on the trains as they come through the city. So we have the opportunity to open these trains and really set the standard for law enforcement and safety so that everyone who's using that train feels like they're going to have a safe ride to get from point A to point B.
Yeah. I mean, it should be an assumption, but I realize it's harder in application. Have you been following the market in, say, San Francisco, looking at some other markets that are linked? And just how tough things have been for that city or even the city of Portland?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, and the city of Seattle could go, I mean, if you've been through the Pacific Place Mall recently, you know the challenges you can have with retail in particular if you don't pay attention to public safety and if you don't look at chronic homelessness as, you know, something that needs to be solved via connecting people to services, not allowing them to slowly kill themselves in a tent on public property, right? Which is the fundamental difference between the East Side and Seattle, and why the East Side stays on top of homelessness and enables access to services while things get out of control here in Seattle is simply because we look at what we call compassionate enforcement as part of the solution. Law enforcement's job is to connect people experiencing homelessness to those services, right? Not to arrest them, but to connect them to the services. On the other hand, if they refuse to leave, then there, of course, is, you know, we're going to enforce our codes. And with that bookend, that's how Bellevue and Kirkland, Redmond, the East Side as a whole is able to, I think, do the compassionate thing and set the standards that say, hey, we're going to make our cities clean and safe. We're also going to help you get to services if you need the help and want it.
I mean, do you think we're in a better position now with the new city council than we have been?
With Seattle?
Yeah.
I do think so. You know, I was really encouraged by a lot of the communications on the campaign trail by some of the council members that won. There's a big focus on public safety. I think if people haven't heard of Bob Kettle, the council member that got elected to represent downtown Seattle, I mean, he's not going to win a Republican primary, but he is really, very had some great ideas about how to compassionately get on top of this homeless problem and help, work with law enforcement and the community and the nonprofits to try to connect people better and clean up the area.
I mean, I'm noticing a difference. Certainly, there's more restaurants and retail opening than closing, and the boards have come off the windows, but we still don't have more than half of the daytime population, moving in to these office buildings. I mean, what would you say is the real vacancy rate if you add in the sublet and the anticipated sublet space of commercial office in both Seattle and in Bellevue?
Yeah, it's a really interesting. I mean, I think in Bellevue we're probably looking at 20% true vacancy right now, and then the dark space beyond that is going to take that number. It's hard to say, right, with underutilized space, just what that number is right now. Wallace Properties, any day of the week, we've got about 40% of our offices empty because people have become accustomed to working from home, right? Mm-hmm. So if we're indicative to, like other companies, even if the space is, the rent's being paid for, it's really, underutilized. So what is that real number? We don't know. I think, Bellevue, I expect that Bellevue is going to recover pretty quickly to the point where new construction will actually be a reality, because what needs to happen is the top tier buildings need to get filled up. Yeah. Not all the buildings, right? And so if you look at the top tier buildings, it's Lincoln Square, right there above, around Bellevue Collection, just because that's the main address, right? And then you have 2 new spec buildings that are under construction. And I look at when those 3 get filled up, I really think there's going to be demand for the next big company, like, not Amazon because they have theirs kind of spoken for, but similarly sized companies that do want to be in Bellevue are going to be looking for that building that's their own, that they can design and build to their specifications. And I think that once those 3 buildings fill up, we'll have an opportunity to see that move forward.
I mean, some of those buildings were purpose-built for Amazon, and I heard that they're just shell and core now. They did not actually take occupancy and are not improving floor by floor because they're leaving it to be determined.
Yeah, they're a little bit quiet about their plans, and I wouldn't want to say anything out loud I'm not supposed to with respect to Amazon, who just is, I mean, I could not, as a former council member, you could not ask for a better company, a better corporate partner. They have been so amazing with Bellevue in helping in every area to absorb the impact of their growth. So really exciting there. They did, you know, they have been, I know they have been building out some of those buildings and not improving them. Initially with the big one, it was because they were trying to figure out what's the new future of office. And if you go look at the Sonic building, which is the 600-foot tall tower right in the heart of downtown Bellevue across from the transit center, about half of that is now built out. And they give us, some of us, a tour of the building. And it's so exciting just to see what state of the art for the future, the post-COVID, post-work-from-home era is like. You know, it's like going to sort of Disneyland. The comforts of home, but the benefits of work, and really exciting to see how their pros really mapped out the build out of that space.
Yeah, no, it is fascinating. What keeps you up at night right now? What are you worried about?
Oh, I think, you know, the duration of this financial challenge, how long is it going to take for things to normalize again, you know, which doesn't necessarily mean that interest rates go all the way back down to where they were. But if they don't, and they probably won't, then that means the fundamentals, like rents are going to have to rise, construction costs are going to have to fall, things are going to have to come into some sort of happy medium. And if that takes 2-3 years, you know, this could be a long slog.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, no, I hear you. Now let's talk about presidential elections and what's the likely scenario. I can vote now, finally. You know, it was naturalized last year, and I'm looking forward to it. But it's going to be an interesting road forward. And, I mean, do you think that...
Congratulations, by the way. That's awesome. Did you do the swearing in down at the Seattle Center?
You know, I wish I could tell you it was a huge ceremony like, you know, I'd heard before, but it really wasn't. It was kind of lick and stick and, you know, take your mask off and off you go.
Really?
Because, yeah, they were pretty backlogged, and they don't do that same kind of ceremony. But, you know, really, it's remarkable to be here and to be a citizen of the United States. And I wish I could say it was always proud. You know, when you look at the politics, it's hard to be sometimes, right? But what a bunch of noise. And, you know, it's a circus. And obviously we'll get through it. You know, what does the economy do in your mind around a presidential election? And let's relate this back to housing.
Well, it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. You know, I'm a very moderate person, and I kind of, you know, as a resident of Washington, you're sort of had the benefit of being along for the ride, because we know that this state is going to vote for the Democrat presidential candidate, no matter who it is. So it sort of gives you a pass as somebody, you know, if you think about it that way. And I also think, you know, from my perspective, the presidential politics and the media coverage of it is so focused on polarization that it's not a really healthy thing to talk about. I prefer to focus on, you know, the local politics and government, and really my hope is that people can start to learn to separate the parties from the positions, right? And I think there are a lot of good moderate Democrats out there that have good views on things that are important for the future of our state. There are a lot of good moderate Republicans that also have that, right? And so trying to understand who the people are rather than what party they chose to run under, I think is really important for the future. And I hope more people can get there.
Yeah, it looks like, you know, the Fed will be moderate, you know, for the next year or two. I mean, I think, you know, from our research, it seems, and our brokers are telling us that they really just have it all priced in. I mean, the stock market's had a pretty good run. You know, there's been $1.5 trillion of equity returned to investors in tech companies, which is very significant. You know, that was a bumpy ride, you know, a couple years ago, and now I think it's housing's turn to see that recovery. So hopefully we've touched bottom, and we're working our way back up. And, you know, with the supply and the demand imbalance that we were speaking of earlier, you know, I really don't see any more regression with values. And as rates come down, and it looks like they're going to stabilize probably in the sixes, you know, low sixes by the end of next year. And most are saying when we hit the mid fives, which is where they will probably belong, no idea that we'll ever see a 4 or a 3 again. I mean, that was a sugar high for the housing market, and it just was artificially created by the Fed for other reasons. So if this is the new normal, then we're all going to have to take a seat and be comfortable in that environment. With you as a developer and as a manager of investment portfolios, and with us, selling individual homes and making investments. Kind of having it priced in is my mind, and the political landscape also has returned to us as being kind of factored in already or priced into a lot of people's decision making. So our research is saying that regardless of whoever our president's going to be, that they're just going to move forward regardless. They're more concerned about the rates than they are about the president.
That people are going to move forward with buying homes.
Yeah. There's a lot of pent up demand. And it was just hard to unstick someone that has a sub 4% mortgage rate, so they're locked into their mortgage.
Well, I think, the golden handcuffs issue is a big one that I think the government could fix. And you don't hear a lot of conversation about that. But, back in a long time ago, before even I was paying attention to this stuff in the late 70s, they had, they had extremely high interest rates at that time. And they got into these sort of wink, wink, nod, nod practices of wrapping mortgages, right, where you'd sort of assign over to your buyer your mortgage, right? Opening up the opportunity to do that for people, I think, could enable this golden handcuff issue to be dealt with, right? If you could sell your home and your mortgage with it, and you had a 30-year fixed at 4.5%, well, now you've got an incredibly enticing sale opportunity, right? But that, no one's talking about those issues, and it's such a huge issue right now. If you've got all this debt that's that low, and you're sort of trapping people in their homes that they're in right now because going to the home that's the right fit for them, location or size wise, isn't really achievable because they'd have to go from 4.5% to 7%. That's a real issue that the government and the administration in particular should be looking at.
Let's talk about one other item, on the state level with the capital gains tax. And I understand the signatures received are sufficient to put it on the ballot, and this repeal might take place. What's your view of that?
Well, I really am proud of Brian Haywood and the group that he worked with. Brian is the guy that sort of championed all of these initiatives. And what's great about the initiatives is they're very common sense. Talk about being moderate person. This is what these issues are is sort of identified points where the Democrats in the legislature really got out of scale, out of line with the general consensus of the voters in the state of Washington. So if you look at capital gains tax and income tax, the voters have consistently said, we don't want that. We don't want to open the door to an income tax. We like our state tax system with the sales tax. The police pursuit bill that they have, is really the opposition to that initiative is trying to paint that as getting rid of, basically allowing police to go chase after people all the time, no matter how reckless. And that's not what this bill is. It's simply putting more discretion in the hands of the trained law enforcement and their supervisors so that they can decide when and under what circumstances and how it makes sense to pursue criminals. So really important common sense initiatives that people should take the time to read carefully and consider very carefully supporting those. And I think people will.
Well, and this capital gains tax is a big deal. I mean, 7%, and obviously it excludes real estate transactions and gains there, but it does absolutely target, specifically tech wealth, I would say. People, we lost Jeff Bezos likely over it. If you're planning on selling a lot of stock in the next couple of years and you got to tack on a 7% capital gains tax, that's going to be a consideration. I liked the days of the evergreen state where we were, a great place to make money and keep it. And that's becoming a little more challenged. Right.
Well, and what's been happening in the legislature is exactly what people suspect would happen is they keep trying to creep up the brackets, from 7% to 9%. They're now having bills to talk about adding real estate in.
Oh, no.
So in addition to having to pay the real estate excise tax, which they took up to 3.5%, right? And they're now talking about taking it up to 4.5% state and local. You would also be looking at having to pay capital gains tax on top of that, right? So in a commercial property, you basically end up paying everything to the government between what you pay the federal government, the state government in capital gains and real estate excise tax. After you pay off your mortgage, you literally, you'd be trapped into not selling it because everything that you would earn on it would go to the government.
Yeah. Well, and, I'm very concerned and also watching closely. I mean, what is our marketability as a region, right? We have, and we still do offer fantastic lifestyle, and we don't have a state income tax, and this capital gains tax aside, and our sales taxes are a little higher, but they're not outrageous, and so that's part of the elixir for recruiting and retention purposes.
Right.
And that's the reason why, I mean, there's like over 100 Bay Area established tech companies that have satellite offices here. Some of the satellite offices are larger than the headquarters down south.
Yeah.
And that's just because they found that it's a better place to recruit and retain. So if we lose that as our advantage, we may not be able to see the same kind of runway of population growth and wealth generation.
I think that's such an excellent point, and I think a lot of times our government leaders really lose sight of just how competitive this country is among the metropolitan areas we have in some of these states, and what these big companies are hearing when they go to a place like Oklahoma or Florida or Tennessee. They're being offered the moon, and the tax structures are, in Florida, the tax structure is just as attractive as Washington was a few years ago before they started putting in these income taxes. And now you're sending these signals to investors that you're not wanted, right? We're just going to keep raising taxes on you and making it harder and harder for you to earn a profit, make a living doing what you do. And what happens? The truly wealthy ones, you're seeing that exodus now. So that's very concerning.
Yeah.
And it doesn't need to be that way. We really, what the government needs to do is recognize that it has been, this at the state level in particular, the amount of spending that's occurred over the last 10 or 15 years, the growth is just incredible. And so they need to start figuring out how to live within their means and stop looking to the taxpayers to just continually fund endless increases in spending.
Yeah, no, that's right. And you look at the state of California, which is actually experiencing a net loss of residents, especially the wealthy. I mean, then you look at other tax-friendly states like Texas, they say Texas, not taxes.
Yeah.
And there's a reason, and they're attracting a lot of that wealth. And so is Washington, and so is Florida, and there's reasons for all these markets. So there's kind of winners and losers, right, mm-hmm. within this musical chairs of where you want your residency to be.
The positive side for our economy, though, is if we can try to get a little more moderate voice in the elected world, the government, and put a lid on this. We are still an amazing port city that has a connection to Asia, and we have one of the most amazing collection of tech brains. The people here are so smart and understand technology in a way that just is not prevalent in very many other places in the country. So investing and bringing your tech business, your life science business, and these other industries that rely on really smart, well-educated people, there's a limit to where you can go, right, and really be able to hire people. And Seattle is just one of those places, the Bellevue area, in the east side too, that is able to compete because we have so many people here that are well-educated, and especially in the tech sector where there's huge demand.
Well, we're blessed to have people like yourself leading us out there in the industry, and your father, Bob, as well. I mean, we're thrilled to have you on the show. Thanks. And share some of your perspectives. We also have another thing in common. We're both 40 under 40 alums.
Oh, yeah.
We're both a little grayer
Congratulations.
Now than we were back then.
No longer under 40, right?
No, definitely not. I think I'm on my 10th anniversary of that, if you know what I'm saying. So, but we appreciate your comments and thoughts. And to our audience, we invite you to share your thoughts and perspectives. Please do offer your commentary and follow us on social media. And we'll be sure to send you the next audience that we will have in front of you just in a little while. We'll see you again on Market Perspectives. Thanks again, Kevin. Boom.
Great.
Well, thank you, Kevin, and to our audience for listening. We look forward to our next Market Perspectives coming up soon. To follow us, please subscribe and also leave a review. Follow us on Facebook and all social media handles. And until next time, see you then.